And I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to the judges. So judges, go for it.
Well, good morning, Virginia. How are you?
Good. How are you?
How are you?
So far, so good, thanks. You all ready to go?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Well, we're ready to go too. So we'll do some introductions and we'll get started. I'm Jack Barlow. I teach politics at Juniata College in Pennsylvania. Rita?
I'm Rita McCann, and I'm an attorney in Huntsville, Alabama.
I'm Tim Moore from the University of Wisconsin in Madison at the Center for the Study of the American Constitution. It's great to be here.
Yeah. I'm Colin Knapp.
I'm Nikki Kumar.
I'm Jonas Konefal, and we're students at Maggie Walker Governor's School in Richmond, Virginia. This is our teacher, Samuel Olmschneider.
Okay, he's just outside of the picture, but we'll take your word for it. All right, very good. Well, it's good to have you here. Good luck today. Hope everything goes well. So we deliberated about it and we decided we liked question 2 a little better for unit 2. So I'll read it and we'll get started. I hope you like question 2 better also. Maybe you don't, I don't know. If you do, don't tell Tim. So question 2. When explaining why the proposed Constitution lacked a Bill of Rights, one Federalist claimed that, quote, in a government possessed of enumerated powers, such a measure would be not only unnecessary, but preposterous and dangerous, end quote. Do you agree or disagree with this statement? Why or why not? In your opinion, did the first 10 amendments to the Constitution sufficiently address the concerns of the Anti-Federalists? To what extent, if any, should we consider adding additional amendments to our Constitution? Begin.
In Federalist 84, Hamilton contended that the Bill of Rights would, quote, contain various exceptions to powers not granted, and on this very account would afford a colorable pretext to claim more than were granted. He argued that it was not only unnecessary, but dangerous to guarantee certain personal liberties because the Constitution, in creating a government of enumerated powers, never threatened them to begin with. He believed that explicitly protecting specific rights would imply that the government could encroach on others. Many Federalists, such as James Wilson, considered bills of rights as only necessary for monarchies, such as England, where the rights of the people were based on the will of their ruler. In their demands for a Bill of Rights, Anti-Federalists stressed what Herbert J. Storing referred to as, quote, common law procedural rights in criminal prosecutions, liberty of conscience, and liberty of the press. Rights in criminal prosecutions included freedom from unjustified search and seizure, to trial by jury, and to confront witnesses. The Fourth Amendment protects citizens from unjustified search and seizure. Without a Bill of Rights, the Constitution only protected trial by jury for criminal cases. The Seventh Amendment directly addresses this issue by guaranteeing the right to jury trial in all cases, and the Fifth and Sixth Amendments ensure effective and fair trials through various provisions.
Minority groups in particular feared a lack of protection for liberty of conscience. In his second essay, an anti-federalist named Philadelphiensis expressed his concerns that the federal government would violate the peaceful religious principles of Pennsylvania Quakers by conscripting them against their will. The principles established by the First Amendment's Free Exercise Clause have successfully protected this religious minority from drafts. Since the Enrollment Act of 1863, all conscription laws have included provisions that allow opt-outs for conscientious objectors. Anti-federalists such as the Federal Farmer argued that one cannot expect most citizens to understand the argument of the strictly enumerated nature of constitutional powers. He wrote, quote, what is the usefulness of a truth in theory unless it exists constantly in the minds of the people and has their assent? Without a document to inform the citizens of their rights, they cannot reasonably defend themselves against tyrannical government. The Bill of Rights guarantees in the Ninth Amendment that, quote, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. Naturally, some provisions that the Anti-Federalists desired failed to find their way into the Constitution. The House approved 17 of James Madison's 19 proposed amendments, but the Senate only approved 12 and the states only ratified 10. Madison's original First Amendment, unratified by the states, guaranteed a set number of constituents per representative and outlined a system for scaling this up as the population increased. Article 1, Section 2 only sets a floor for apportionment at 30,000 constituents per representative. Anti-Federalists heavily criticized the general representation seen in the national legislature, but a guarantee of more local representation in Congress failed to pass the gauntlet of ratification.
The United States has amended the Constitution only 17 times since the Bill of Rights passed, and no major changes to the formal constitutional structure have passed since the 22nd Amendment in 1951. In the mind of George Mason, however, amendments ought to be added to the Constitution in, quote, an easy, regular, and constitutional way, in order for the document to respond to the demands of dissenters like the Anti-Federalists. The enduring blight of the exceptions clause on the 13th Amendment demonstrates how the Constitution has failed to respond to the need for change. Under the guise of the 13th Amendment's exceptions clause, the United States government has exploited the labor of 2.2 million Americans behind bars to produce picnic tables and police uniforms. Prisoners work for a paltry 83 cents an hour in non-industry jobs. The 13th Amendment fails in its goal of abolishing slavery, and a failure to amend this would be an affront to the idea that our Constitution is a living document. Just as the Supreme Court has used their power of judicial review to adapt our Constitution to fit the time, it is the duty of Congress and the state legislatures to alter the Constitution along with the people it serves to protect. Additionally, this amendment has a much higher chance of success than some more partisan proposals. As such, all legislative bodies must finally do away with slavery via an anti-penal labor amendment.
Okay, thanks. So I'm curious, given your opening statement, we think of the Bill of Rights as being a thing to defend against tyrannical government. But talk to me a little bit about the Bill of Rights as a defense against a tyrannical majority.
I would first point to James Madison's argument in Federalist 10, in which he expressed his view that the rights of minorities were more effectively protected on a national scale, in which it was harder for any one faction to obtain a majority. But Madison still in this large republic feared that the rights of minorities would not be protected. And that's why in his original plan for the Bill of Rights, his 14th Amendment included applications of several essential First Amendment rights to the states. And that's where he feared the oppression would come from.
And this oppression that my colleague talks about did come in the form of the Alien and Sedition Acts during the John Adams presidency, which was a Federalist administration that actively quelled the protests and the free speech rights of the anti-Federalist objectors and the Democratic Republicans. And thankfully that was, I guess, overturned, and we were able to see that a tyrannical majority was protected, a tyrannical minority. A minority was protected from the tyrannical majority in this case.
I would argue with my colleague a bit there. I don't think that we can necessarily say that the minority was protected, because it was not the Supreme Court that overturned the Alien and Sedition Acts, but it was the Jefferson administration which later repealed the acts. So it took the minority becoming a majority to actually overturn those acts.
Okay.
I've always been perplexed about Mr. Madison. Maybe I want your thoughts on this. He goes from, I don't want a Bill of Rights to, or no, I don't want amendments to, yeah, I think we need a Bill of Rights. So how do you explain that flip flop?
I think we should definitely look at the precedent of the Virginia Declaration of Rights, which was also written by Madison, in which he had outlined certain personal liberties, such as religious freedom. And I feel like over time, he realized that the anti-federalist argument was in part accurate, because he decided to incorporate these rights into the Bill of Rights, namely the First Amendment.
Additionally, James Madison was a man of strategy, and he knew that this Constitution would not be ratified if he did not, I guess, agree in some part with the anti-federalists in this administration of a Bill of Rights. And as such, he saw that the adding of a Bill of Rights would be much more effective in passing the Constitution than it would be to keep fighting and omit this Bill of Rights.
I would elaborate on my second colleague's point a little bit. I think the intent of the Bill of Rights was somewhat to avoid a second convention, because that's a lot of the amendments that anti-federalists were putting forward, like Representative Thomas Tucker of South Carolina, attacked not protections of rights of individuals, but the structure of the government itself. He wanted reform to Article 3, Section 2's judicial power, and reform to the various Article 1, Section 8 powers. So I think Madison sort of tried to appease these other anti-federalists who wanted to curb federal power by protecting minority or individual rights.
So a quick follow-up. So are anti-federalists happy with the Bill of Rights?
I would say that the anti-federalists should be happy, except we see numerous cases in the present day in which the individual liberties of the Bill of Rights are not upheld, namely the 10th Amendment, which should reserve certain powers to the states. However, in cases such as United States v. Bond, we see that the necessary and proper clause in the body of the text overpowers the 10th Amendment, and therefore the anti-federalist fears prove to be true.
I would add too that in the 18th century, I don't think the Anti-Federalists were pleased with the Bill of Rights, mainly because of the more fundamental structural issues of the Constitution. Like I mentioned, Thomas Tucker was one who wanted more structural reform. Patrick Henry was a big hater of the powerful federal government. And these Anti-Federalists who didn't want necessarily protection of rights, but a curb on federal power, they were not pleased at all.
Thank you.
Do you think that we need to amend possibly the method by which amendments are achieved?
I absolutely think we do need to amend this process. We can see it outlined in Article 5 of the Constitution, and it is very, very difficult to get an amendment passed. There are two methods, first of which is a call for a convention, and the second of which is a 2/3 call in both of the houses of Congress. And I feel like this is exactly what we feared in the Articles of Confederation. There was such a difficult process to get amendments passed, and that's what we have in the Constitution today as well.
And I would add on to my colleague that part of this difficulty in changing the actual amendment process itself is that we have no precedent to look towards in actually amending the articles and the body of the Constitution itself, rather than just, it's harder than simply adding an amendment.
I think the most difficult obstacle to overcome is the 3/4 majority required in state conventions or by state legislatures. But I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing. I think the Article 5 system has allowed for numerous effective reforms, like the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. The ratification of those was somewhat coercive. Other ones as well, like the 19th Amendment.
Coming from Virginia, yes.
Yes. They made effective change, and I think a temporary, like 50-year stagnation in that is not necessarily, doesn't warrant immediate constitutional reform in that area.
So one of the things that the Anti-Federalists would have wanted would be to have the word expressly in the 10th Amendment. Do you think that would have made a difference if they'd said that the Constitution confines Congress to powers expressly granted?
I think that absolutely would have made a difference, yes. Article 2 of the Articles of Confederation had such a clause, and the federal government had been extremely weak under the Confederation. But I do think that an inclusion of such a clause in the 10th Amendment would pretty directly conflict with the idea of implied powers that's created by the necessary and proper clause in Article 1, Section 8. So I don't think that is really compatible with the new Constitution.
Do you think expressly would necessarily clash with the necessary and proper clause? Unpack that for me, because it's not clear to me that it would.
I think the necessary and proper clause is so contentious, even without the word expressly used in the 10th Amendment, that, and we can see that in NFIB versus Sebelius, where the necessary and proper clause is really questioned in comparison to the taxing and spending clauses. And as such, I think the inclusion of the word expressly in the 10th Amendment would clash too much, given the fact that, like I said earlier, the necessary and proper clause is too contentious in of itself.
I would add too that I think the very nature of the powers of the Constitution, they're such broad powers. Like Article 1, Section 8 has the power to tax and spend, to raise and regulate an army and a navy, and it just leaves it at that. So I think that necessitates some kind of implied power. I mean, if that were to be shut down by an Article 2 of the Confederation government kind of clause in the 10th Amendment, I think the federal government would be neutered.
Let's go back to pre-1800, where I'm most comfortable. Let's talk a little rights theory. How similar or different is the British conception of rights versus the American conception of rights?
There is a clear difference in certain provisions of the English Bill of Rights versus the American Bill of Rights. And I think one of the most important and historically kind of able to pinpoint is the separation of church and state and the kind of free practice of religion in the United States. Whereas in England and Britain, the church and state were inseparable, and where colonists were worried about that in their administration of the government.
I would like to add on to my colleague and say that there are also many similarities between the two, namely the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms between the English Bill of Rights and our current Constitution. In the grievances listed towards King James II in the English Bill of Rights, they had said that he shouldn't limit the right to bear arms to just the Protestants. And clearly, this is an important right in both of these documents.
I would add too that the American rights and English rights were pretty similar when it came to judicial rights and rights like trial by jury and right to confront witnesses that had been established as far back as the Magna Carta. Also, one thing that was sort of uniquely American was their interpretation of the freedom of press. After the trial of John Peter Zenger in the 1700s, America had this kind of innovation that truthful libel was okay. And that was not at all accepted in England at the time, or even.
Let me ask it that. Excellent. But in theory, does it, let me ask it a little bit different way. Does it matter where rights come from in the British versus American context?
I think the easiest, kind of separation between the two is that the rights were derived from the king, whereas in the United States, they were derived from the people themselves.
Thank you.
Okay, great.
Right.
Thank you.
Congratulations. We'll give it a nice round of applause before we hear from the judges, and we'll go ahead and hear some feedback from them at this time.
Well, I thought that your opening statement, as fast as it went, was well crafted. You did a nice job of running through the various amendments and why, for example, the draft laws and conscientious objectors and sort of how all of these things worked, and that's good. And so you gave some clear insights into the application of these. And you, in some of the follow-up, you were talking about the anti-federalist or the opposition reaction, the Jeffersonian reaction to the Alien Sedition Act. But of course, the solution for that was they voted the guys out, right? And they voted Jefferson and the Jeffersonians in by a fairly significant margin. So, that was a practical demonstration that the people weren't going to accept the government trampling on their rights. And I just wanted to talk a little bit more because I think the Bill of Rights points in both directions, right? It restrains the majority as well as restraining government or the elite. Alien Sedition Acts and truthful libel. Well, of course, the Alien Sedition Acts did recognize truth as a defense. And that was, in fact, an innovation on the British common law of seditious libel. So the Alien Sedition Acts really are a liberalization of the English practice. And we've kind of lost sight of that because nobody likes John Adams. But I think that well, come on, Tim. You know everyone.
Fair enough.
You can name names. But anyway, good, provocative discussion. Really appreciate having this conversation with you. I hope you will keep this conversation up because you guys are clearly ones who know what you're doing and what you're talking about. So keep on having these conversations as you go through life. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sometimes I think we say these things every year and it gets old, but you're new, you're different, and you're here. And I'm always so thankful I'm a trial lawyer, and I'm a lawyer that works with kids who get in trouble. This is my chance to get to hear from good kids, and it makes me so thankful for our country's future, because not only are you able to talk with these two very, very intelligent historians and professors, but and hold your own, quite frankly, oh hush, but you have learned it and you know what it means. And whatever your future holds for you is going to make our country better, just so much better. And I worry sometimes that we say that too many times, but you're not coming through here for the third year so that you've heard it before. You need to know how valuable your knowledge and your intelligence is. And I appreciate what I heard today.
Thank you so much.
All that's a warning. If you ever show up in her court, you're in real deep trouble.
Not true, not true.
No, listen, you guys know your history. And I'm impressed with, Philadelphiensis, Federal Farmer, Tucker. You're citing some, what I would consider like the secondary level of writers of the time. I also, and the fact you mentioned Federal Farmer in the context is basically saying to Wilson, like, stop with this ridiculous argument. So your summation in your opening statement was great. In the follow-ups, I would say even better. Your explanation of Madison's flip-flop, that it's about he's scared to death of a second convention. So is there a way I can screw the anti-federalists? Yes. Let's ignore structural amendments. So that's key. I thought you were very thoughtful about the amending process as well, that maybe we ought to drop the 3/4. And I'm assuming that means keep the 2/3. Your answer to on my second question on British versus English, you did like the point by point, but then eventually you did get to the thing. It does matter if a king's giving or a government is giving rights versus whether there's a transcendent or a natural rights theory. So your understanding is very, very good, and I'm impressed with the last 15 minutes that we've had. So thank you, and good luck to your team going forward. Good job, Sam.